Jason, Stefan, thank you so much for giving us your time today. We're going to talk about something that's actually really very important in conservation, but not really spoken of that often. It's actually one of the major pitfalls in conservation, and that's a lack of reliable data to measure actual impact.
Yeah, thanks for this opportunity. We don't often get a chance to speak about the sort of behind the scenes things. It's not out there in the field, but I mean, these are critical components for ensuring success out there.
Okay, so maybe let's start right at the beginning. What is monitoring and evaluation, and why is it important?
Lisa, I think if I can perhaps start, well, monitoring and evaluation, or monitoring, evaluation, and learning, or like we used to, well, like to call it MEL. It's really, I would say, the North Star or the compass of any project management system. And as we all know, Peace Parks Foundation is a project-centric organization. So we bring about change in protected areas through the implementation of projects. But how do we know we're achieving what we set out to achieve? How do we know whether we're on track? Are we making mistakes? And how do we learn from that? And that's exactly where MEL comes in. So at a more technical level, so the main purpose of MEL is really to document what information we collect, analyze, and review, so we can make changes. We can be adaptive, agile, and improve.
So, Jason, I mean, that sounds like a really important part of it. And I mean, it sounds easy. I mean, just go out in the field, collect the data, and then, you analyze it. Why is it so difficult?
Well, it's difficult for a host of reasons as we keep learning. Most of this will just boil down to time and resources, and it's compounded by the fact that we work in such complicated landscapes across so many countries. I guess an easier start would be to look at it from the beginning. When monitoring work, what do you monitor? Even simply just deciding on what it is we're going to do isn't all that easy. You want to monitor things that are informative and help guide the project and help you learn correctly as you go along. And this isn't simple. There's a myriad of things to decide on, and we put a lot of effort into this. A simple example would be looking at something like recording the number of snares we record in a protected area. If you record that and you keep tracking the values, you have to actually evaluate what the data says. If there's an increase in the number of snares found, does it mean that we had better search efforts? Does it mean there were more snares, or does it mean we just got more lucky? And if there's less snares found, then you do the inverse of that. More broadly speaking, I think we would also have to cater to things like capacity, time, resources, and, as I mentioned earlier, the complicated landscapes. Not all of these places have fantastic connectivity, so we have to deal with getting data from sources where they can't actually upload data easily. And the people that we're dealing with are often swamped with other very complicated and time-consuming issues. So we have to provide the correct amount of support, and we have to make sure that what it is they're using makes sense and they can interact with what we've asked them to use simply.
So, Stefan, you were tasked with establishing a project systems and compliance function within Peace Parks Foundation, and then you were handed sort of the hot potato, the MEL hot potato. How did you go about filling the gaps that Jason spoke about?
Yeah, hot potato indeed. It was a very challenging exercise. So just to put it in perspective and to maybe tie into what Jason just said with some of the challenges, we run over 130 active projects across 5 different countries in SADC region, or in the southern part of Africa. And we mobilize more than $65 million, and that's donor funding that we are accountable and responsible for. So there are a lot of moving parts, and to track and monitor this is a massive undertaking. But I think I was lucky. I had a very good M&E team to help me put together all the moving parts, and it all started by really understanding the what. So we sat and really asked ourselves what is that we are doing. And I think here's where understanding strategy became really important. So what is important to us? And when I say us, I mean Peace Parks Foundation. What do we want to achieve? What is our vision? What is our goals? And in asking those questions, that took us on a journey of reviewing the Peace Parks Foundation strategy, its vision, determining the organization's strategic objectives. And once we had that, we could then build a strategic framework based on a theory of change principle. So, I mean, without that strategic framework, we lacked a roadmap. So now that we had a roadmap, we had a plan according to which we can build or could then build our MEL system. And what it essentially did, it allowed us to identify all our project activities. From there, we could determine our outputs. These outputs result in an outcome. We could articulate and identify that. And then finally, these flow into impacts. And that was really the process we followed, but it was something that took a lot of time, input from various teams on the ground, senior management. But really, without that strategic framework, we didn't have our game plan. We didn't have a roadmap to actually build our MEL system accordingly.
So, Jason, you were brought in on the technical side of things. What were some of the most important things that you looked at?
So I think the most important things we had to deal with technically would obviously be the connectivity that I mentioned earlier, and then just simplicity in using the system itself. The connectivity is easy to understand. The people that are recording and giving us data, they just can't send the data quickly. They don't have access to internet, and we had to build things that accommodated that. An example was an app that we built in-house. We know that the people that don't have GPS reception, they can't just upload using their phone. And so what we had to do was rely on things like GPS, and we had to use things that stored data locally. And once these people were able to move to an area that had proper reception, they were able to send it to us. And this also works quite strongly with the next one, is the amount of data and the simplicity. So the people that we are dependent on for sending us this data have a lot to do, have very complicated tasks, and are often inundated with data requests. It's a lot of work to send this data through regularly, and we are very fussy about how accurate it is. So there's a level of verification we put through too. And this just means making something simple for the user. We treated it like building a product, and the people that put the data into our system, we made it easy for them. We discussed regularly so they could see what they were going to do. We made it simple so they could just put in the correct values and that they didn't struggle, and they could see what the previous data records were. And ultimately something that they could adapt to quickly without making their lives too hard.
So some of the people that you're speaking about, can you give us a few examples of the profiles? Like typically, who would these people be?
So a pretty big example for us, and we spent a lot of time working with them over the past year, is the contact farmers in the Samala Community Conservancy in Zambia. And this is where we're implementing the conservation agriculture project. And what we needed from them is we needed to keep an accurate record of how conservation agriculture was progressing. So we needed to look into the size of the fields. Is it actually taking up less land like we had predicted it would? What is their yield looking like? What types of crops are they growing? Is there an increased amount of diversity? And this is the stuff we needed to record. So what we did essentially is we spoke to all these contact farmers from the beginning, and we found out that they had an issue with connectivity with previous recording things. So we spoke to them and we found out how they would easily interpret an application, what would be easier for them just to install and download considering their devices. And we built something that could be used, just installed quickly on their phone. It would be installed when there is connectivity. They would go to an area, record the size of their field with the tap of a button, and then they would input other certain data like the number of seeds used or the yield from their crop. So This is a pretty key example of how we like to treat our M&E recording. As opposed to having a top-down approach where we just force it on everyone on the ground, we prefer to use bottom-up, speaking to everyone that will be recording, hearing their input and building everything, all the data collection in parallel with them.
So, I mean, it's complicated, but, providing, getting that information from your contact farmers, you just go to them and you speak to them and you sit down with them. But you did this during a time when travel was pretty much impossible. So did you do online sessions with these guys? Like, how did that work?
Yeah, this was quite a big challenge for us during COVID because, like you mentioned now, it's a lot easier to go and sit with people when you're actually right next to them and you can explain what it is you want them to collect and how to hear their issues, to understand what problems they're having with the system. If you are in person, you can simply just show them the application. You can show them with a touch of a button or tell them to follow the cursor on your screen, and then they could understand and ask questions, and it's back and forth. It becomes easy. However, being COVID and having to do everything remotely, we had to do everything over Teams and Zoom and stuff like that, and that meant a lot of issues. It meant getting everyone into the same call, which it's not very simple considering how many people we had to train. And once again, and I know I sound like a broken record, but it is the connectivity that poses a lot of challenges. You're trying to teach people something quite complicated and foreign to them, which it would be to anyone who's not used to these systems. And you're trying to talk, and then your voice cuts out mid-session, and then the cursor freezes and the screen doesn't do what you need it to do. So overall, it was a lot of patience from the people we were training. We're very grateful they responded so well, and they put in an immense amount of effort. They were very patient with the freezing, having to come, set up these meetings, take time from, agriculture, and helping us record. So yes, it was quite a challenge, but so far we've been happy with the results. We've got a lot of data in that's been very helpful.
Stefan, you recently traveled to Zambia and you had the opportunity to now actually physically sit down with some of the project managers. Can you just tell us a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, I think to add into what Jason said, it was really important for us that we take a bottoms-up approach. Most systems fail if it is forced down from the top. So that meant really going in field and visiting the teams where they are. So we did a trip to Zambia, met with the project staff there, and literally sat where we could. If we can find a table, somewhere at a even if it's a makeshift office, we sat around a computer. Showed the guys, asked them to interact with the system, asked them what their needs and requirements are, but also explaining what it is that we wanted to achieve. It's important to find that synergy. We can't always produce something that is simple and easy, because at the end of the line, there are donors and investors that rely on information. And we have a responsibility to report accurately and correctly to them. So but it was good for us also to see some of the challenges, the connectivity challenges that these guys have. It gives us an understanding too. It's very easy to build a system at head office in Stellenbosch, and it's very easy to forget that there's someone out there in the middle of Zambia with no connectivity that's got to use this. So bear in mind, their conditions and their requirements when implementing something.
So who do you think will benefit the most from the system that you guys have built?
Lisa, I would say, in today's age, information is key. Everybody wants information. Now, for us, there's two main customers that we look at. One internal customers and external customers. So, this will allow us to report accurately within our own management structures. How do we as an organization do? What is our impact? It's important that we also know, are we achieving our targets? But more importantly, it will allow us to report long-term impact to our donors and investors. And I keep harping on donors and investors because we must remember that every project is funded by a donor and or an investor. and they want to know what impact their contribution is making, and Mel now allows us to tell them, to share that information with them.
Jason, you mentioned that there's been some interest from other organizations who are looking to either build something similar or have similar challenges. Would you be open to working with other like-minded organizations?
Absolutely. We're already doing it. We reach out and we welcome collaboration in this area. This gets down to, well, we do this primarily for two reasons. And the first is standardization, and the second is duplication of efforts. The standardization means that we all want to collect the same data so that we can compare it in different areas. And by doing that, we can just learn better. If a very simple example of standardization would be how we collect agricultural data. Certain people will collect the number of seeds they put in, certain organizations will collect it in bags, and certain in kilograms and other metric units. And if we all just do it in the same fashion across all the different landscapes, it's much easier to rapidly compare and understand what's going on. And if we all collect the same things, it makes for a better case study, and it lets us understand how to improve the work that we are actually doing. The second, which is duplication of efforts, I feel that's quite a major problem in the conservation space, is that many foundations and organizations are all collecting data and they keep it to themselves, and this may be intentional or not, but if everyone is open and they follow a similar protocol and they collect the same things and they're open with one another, then you may avoid having to collect the same data as someone else. These are very complex landscapes, and everyone doesn't know that they're often collecting the same thing. And if we all spoke and understood and we were collecting in unison, then we'd be able to spend more time on the actual conservation work.
So let's fast forward 10 years down the line, right? What do we as SADC, in terms of a data package, what do we have and what are we doing with it?
Lisa, so I mean, for us, we would like a successful MEL system. Now, success for us would be, like Jason said, a standardized system, one, that can track and monitor impacts at a regional level. Tying into what Jason said, I mean, there are many role players in the conservation industry, and they're each measuring, like you said, their own impacts, but ultimately we are all in the same game. We're all players in the same game. Now, imagine one MEL system tracking standardized metrics in a coordinated manner, and then providing information on real impacts that NGOs are having in achieving sustainable conservation. I mean, that's what we hope this will do. Hopefully 10 years from now, we have that tool, we have that information. Remember, my assessment or collection of information today is a baseline assessment for someone else. And let's start sharing that information and standardize across landscape. I mean, it's for the betterment of the environment and what we're all trying to achieve out there.
Do you think if everybody has a clear picture of what's going on, there'll be less wastage?
I think so. I think it's not deliberate wastage. It's not knowing what the other person is doing. I mean, with so many role players in the landscape, I mean, they're all trying their best. They're all there to do good. But if we get together and we agree and standardize on what we collect, definitely less time wasting, less money wasting, better allocation of resources, and having an overall a view of a much bigger area.
Okay. Jason, if you had to give somebody one piece of advice in setting up the system, what would it be?
That's a tough one. If I had to give one piece of advice, I would say consider the people that are collecting. That's by far one of the biggest challenges we've faced, is just sheer capacity overload, and considering the people who are collecting and making it easier for them means that they're more willing to give you the data.
Stefan, what about you?
I would take it from the other angle, where I'd say know what it is that you want to achieve. So look forward and then work back from there. You can't give the user the type of interface they require if you don't know, what it needs to achieve and where it needs to go. So really think what it is that you want to achieve. Where do you want to be? How are you going to get there? And then build something that will take you there.
Guys, thank you so much for your time. It's been incredibly interesting. Well done on what you've achieved so far. I now have a better understanding of what it is that you've actually built. And I wish you all the success going forward. And yeah, I'm very keen to see who's going to reach out to you.